A Final Confession of Micah Rourke. Cimarron Mountains, New Mexico Territory. October 17th, 1899. To whoever finds these pages after I'm gone. My hand trembles as I write these words by lantern light. The mountain wind howls outside like the ghosts of all those I've sent to the darkness. It's fitting, I suppose. Cold has settled in my bones these past months, and no amount of firewood seems to warm this cabin or my blood. The doctor in Santa Fe gave me till winter's end. I reckon he was generous. I'm writing this not for absolution. There ain't none coming for a man like me, but for truth. Some truths need witnessing, even if only by strangers who'll find an old man's corpse in a forgotten cabin. My name is Micah Rourke, and by my count, I've killed 47 men. Each one with a face and name I remember, each one with a reason. Though the reasons were lies I told myself. They were all for her. Clara Dawson. Clara Elliott after she married. Every pull of the trigger, every knife across flesh, every life I took. All offerings laid at her feet, though she never knew it. Never knew me, not truly. And now she's gone, buried in Missouri soil, and I'm alone with memories sharp as broken glass. So let me tell it plain. The story of a broken boy who grew into a monster, all in the name of something he called love. I first laid eyes on Clara Wilson in the spring of 1869, when we were both 15, and the war had been over long enough that folks in our little Missouri town were starting to forget the worst of it. Her family had moved from Kentucky, her father taking over the general store after old man Tanner died of the influenza. I remember the dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through the store windows that first day. She stood behind the counter in a blue dress, her hair the color of wheat fields in August, tied back with a ribbon that matched her eyes. When she smiled at me, something in my chest tightened like a fist. "You need something?" she asked, and I realized I'd been staring. "Tobacco for my pa," I mumbled, though we both knew Abel Rourke grew his own. She nodded like it made perfect sense and measured out an ounce from a jar behind her. Her fingers were long and graceful, uncalloused unlike the other girls in town who spent their days working farms or washing. I paid with 2 pennies I'd earned mending Mr. Guthrie's fence and left without saying another word. That night, I dreamed of her, and nearly every night after. My own life wasn't much to speak of back then. Ma had died birthing me, and Pa carried that grief like a stone in his pocket. Always there, always weighing him down. He wasn't cruel, just distant, like part of him had been buried with her. We scraped by on our small farm outside town, me doing most of the work as Pa's lungs got worse from years of mine dust. I wasn't much among the town boys. Too quiet, too serious, too poor. Jack Maddox and his friends took a particular pleasure in reminding me of my place. The day everything changed was market day in August. I'd brought our meager crop of corn to sell, and as usual, Maddox found me. "If it ain't the ghost boy," he called out, his gang of 3 trailing behind him like obedient dogs. "Still talking to no one but the corn stalks, Rourke?" I kept my eyes down, hoping they'd tire of me quick. "Asked you a question, boy." Maddox shoved me hard, sending our corn spilling across the dusty street. People turned to watch, but did nothing. That was the way of things. "Picking up your pa's drunk habits yet?" Another shove. "Bet that's why your ma couldn't stand to live. Had to die just to get away from the both of you." Something in me snapped then. I lunged at him, 15 years of quiet rage behind my fist. But Maddox was bigger, stronger, and I found myself face down in the dirt, tasting blood and shame while his friends held my arms. Let him go. Her voice cut through the jeering. Clara stood there, blue dress replaced by a simple brown one, but no less striking for it. "This ain't your concern, Clara," Maddox said, but I heard the change in his tone. Everyone wanted Clara's good opinion. I said, "Let him go." She stepped closer. "Or I'll tell my father who's been stealing tobacco from our store after hours. and your pa will hear about it before sundown." The pressure on my arms vanished. I pushed myself up, keeping my eyes on the ground, unable to look at her or anyone. My corn lay scattered and trampled. "You all right?" she asked when the others had gone. I nodded, still not looking up. "Here." She knelt and began gathering what corn could be salvaged. "They're just mean because they're simple. Nothing frightens simple folk more than someone who thinks differently." I finally looked at her then. Up close, her eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray, like the sky before a storm. No pity in them, just a steady kind of strength. "Thank you," I managed. "Micah, right? Micah Rourke?" When I nodded, she smiled. "I'm Clara Wilson, though I suppose you know that, being as how there's only one general store." "Why'd you help me?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. She considered this, head tilted slightly. "Because it wasn't right, what they were doing, and because you looked like you needed someone on your side." She handed me the gathered corn. "Everyone needs that sometimes." From that moment, I was hers, though she wouldn't know it for decades, not until it was far too late. We weren't friends, exactly, in the years that followed. Clara was sunshine and easy laughter, surrounded by people drawn to her light. I remained in shadow, watching from a distance. We'd nod when passing in town, exchange pleasantries when I came to the store. Sometimes she'd ask about the farm or comment on the weather, and I'd hoard those small moments like a miser with gold coins. I learned everything about her, how she hummed under her breath when concentrating, how she slipped extra candy to the poorest children when her father wasn't looking, how she loved stories and borrowed books from the school teacher, how her smile dimmed slightly when her mother criticized her posture or manners. By 18, Clara had half the young men in the county calling on her. I watched them come and go, each one less worthy than the last in my estimation. None of them saw her, not truly. None of them worshipped her as I did, silently from afar. Then Elijah Elliott came to town. Eli was everything I wasn't: tall, handsome, educated. The new school teacher arrived from St. Louis with books and ideas and a gentle confidence that never needed proving. He spoke about poetry and history like they were living things. Even my taciturn father admitted the man had good sense about him. The first time I saw Clara laugh at something Eli said outside the church, something dark unfurled inside me. I recognized it even then as an ugly thing, this possessiveness over someone who had never been mine. But I couldn't stop it from growing, couldn't stop myself from hating a man who had done nothing wrong except see in Clara what I had always seen. Their courtship was brief and proper. By spring of 1873, they were married in the white clapboard church, with Clara in a dress her mother had saved 3 years to buy. I stood at the back, watching through a haze of pain as she promised herself to him, her face radiant with a happiness I had never seen before. That night, I sat by the creek where Clara and her friends used to wade during summer, a bottle of whiskey, my only companion. I imagined walking to their small house near the school, imagined putting a bullet through Eli Elliott's heart while he slept beside her. The thought both sickened and thrilled me. Dawn found me still by the water, the bottle empty, my decision made. There was nothing for me in Dawson Creek anymore. Pa was 2 years in the ground, the farm sold to cover his debts. Clara would build a life with Eli, have children, grow old surrounded by love and respect, and I would disappear. I left that morning with nothing but my pa's old Remington, a knife, and clothes on my back. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to care if Micah Rourke lived or died. I walked until the Missouri hills were far behind me, until I could breathe without feeling like my chest was caving in at the thought of Clara in another man's arms. I was 19 years old, hollow with a hunger that food couldn't touch, and heading west where I'd heard a man could reinvent himself in blood and dust. The man who taught me to kill was named Jerome Blackwood, though most knew him as the Judge. Not because he'd ever held court, but because of the cold precision with which he delivered what he called final verdicts to the men he hunted. I met him in a Kansas saloon in '74, half-starved and desperate after months of drifting west. I'd been surviving on odd jobs and hunting, but winter was coming, and I had nothing. "You got a look about you," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. He was older, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and eyes like flint. "Like you're carrying something heavy." "Ain't we all?" I muttered. He studied me over his whiskey. "Some weights can't be put down, but they can be balanced with purpose." He pushed a wanted poster across the table. "You know how to use that Remington on your hip, boy?" The bounty was for a horse thief named Marcus Leary, $50 dead or alive. More money than I'd seen in months. "I can shoot straight enough," I said. The judge nodded. "Good, but killing a man ain't like hunting deer. It changes the air around you, changes what you see in the mirror after." His voice held no emotion, just fact. "I'm getting too old to track alone. You help me bring in Leary, I'll give you a third cut and teach you the trade." I should have walked away, should have found honest work, built a life with clean hands, but all I could think about was Clara and Eli in their little house and how I had nothing, was nothing. "When do we leave?" I asked. We found Leary 3 days later in a barn outside Hayes. He didn't surrender, and the judge's bullet took him through the throat. I watched the light go out of a man's eyes for the first time, felt the strange, hollow silence that follows death. "You didn't hesitate," the judge said later as we rode back with Leary's body draped over his horse. "That's good. Hesitation gets you killed in this line." "He was a thief," I said, trying to justify the emptiness I felt. The judge laughed, a dry sound like dead leaves scraping stone. "They're all something, boy. Thieves, killers, rapists. But after a while, that don't matter much. They become targets, nothing more. The why of it fades." He was wrong about that. For me, the why never faded. It just changed. I rode with the judge for 2 years, learning how to track men across impossible terrain, how to read sign others would miss, how to be patient in the hunt. I learned to shoot with both hands, to throw a knife with deadly accuracy, to kill quickly and without passion. The judge was neither kind nor cruel, just efficient, like a well-oiled machine with a singular purpose. We brought in 26 men in those years, 18 of them dead. Each time, I felt less. Each death became easier, the faces blurring together in my memory. I sent most of my money back to Missouri, to Clara, in unmarked envelopes with no note. I told myself it was to help her and Eli, that the extra money would make their lives better. But deep down, I knew it was a way to remain connected to her, to insert myself into their life unseen. When the judge took a bullet in Wichita in the winter of '76, he died the way he lived, without fuss or sentiment. "You're ready to hunt alone now," were his last words to me. Just remember, we all become what we chase, sooner or later. I buried him in unmarked ground and moved on, my reputation beginning to grow. Rourke became a name whispered in saloons across Kansas and Nebraska. I was 23, with eyes that made men uncomfortable and hands that never shook when they needed to be steady. I drifted southwest into the territories, taking increasingly dangerous contracts. The pay was better, and the farther I went from Missouri, the less I dreamed of Clara. Or so I told myself. Then in '79, I heard news that changed everything. A pair of outlaws I was tracking mentioned Dawson Creek, my hometown, saying it was easy pickings, now that some sickness had swept through. I abandoned the hunt and rode east for the first time in 6 years, pushing my horse to exhaustion. Fear clawed at my insides, fear that Clara might be gone, taken by disease before I could ever see her face again. The town had changed little, though there were new graves in the cemetery on the hill. I kept my distance, observing from the woods like a ghost. Clara and Eli's house stood unchanged, and relief nearly brought me to my knees when I saw her hanging laundry in the yard, a small boy of about 4 playing nearby. Her son, Eli's son. She looked older, more careworn, but still beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. I watched them for 3 days, learning their routines, seeing how Eli kissed her goodbye each morning before walking to the schoolhouse, how Clara sang to the boy during their chores. They struggled, I could see. The illness had taken much from the town, and Eli's teaching salary barely kept them fed. Yet they seemed happy in a quiet way, rich in things I couldn't touch or understand. On the 4th night, I left a small leather pouch with $200, nearly all I had, on their porch. Enough to ease their burdens without raising too many questions. Then I rode away, but not back to the territories. Instead, I stayed within a 100-mile radius of Dawson Creek, taking contracts on men who might someday threaten Clara's world. I became the unseen guardian of her happiness, the shadow that eliminated potential dangers before they could reach her door. When droughts came in the early 80s, I sent more money. When I heard rumors of a band of outlaws moving toward the area, I hunted them down with a cold precision that would have made the judge proud. When sickness threatened again, I paid for a doctor from St. Louis to visit the town, claiming an anonymous benefactor had the town's interests at heart. All for her, always for her. Each kill another sacrifice laid at her altar, though she never knew the blood being spilled in her name. I learned about her life in fragments, from conversations overheard in saloons, from occasional careful questions to travelers from that region. Her son, Thomas, grew strong and smart like his father. Eli's reputation as a teacher of exceptional quality spread beyond the county. Clara helped organize a small library for the town. In '87, disaster struck. Eli was thrown from a horse while returning from a neighboring town and died of his injuries 2 days later. I received the news in a dusty Arizona saloon, and my first shameful thought was, she's free now. I rode to Dawson Creek again but stayed hidden in the hills above town. I watched her grieve, dressed in black, her face pale and drawn as she stood by Eli's grave with 13-year-old Thomas beside her. I wanted to go to her then, to reveal myself as her secret benefactor, to offer comfort and protection. But something held me back. Perhaps it was seeing the genuine grief in her eyes, the knowledge that she had truly loved Eli in a way she could never love a shadow like me. Or perhaps it was fear that she would look at my hands and somehow see the blood on them, blood I had spilled believing it was for her protection. So I left again, but not before arranging for a significant sum to find its way to her through the bank, presented as an insurance policy Eli had secretly maintained. A final gift from a good man, not from the killer who watched from the darkness. The years that followed were my most violent. I took contracts other bounty hunters refused, hunting the worst men across New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. My reputation grew darker, whispers following me from town to town. Some called me the Ghost for my ability to find men who had disappeared. Others used less flattering names. I killed efficiently, dispassionately, no longer pretending it was all for Clara's safety. The truth was, killing had become the only thing that quieted the roaring in my head, the only time I felt anything approaching peace. The judge had been right after all. I had become what I chased. Still, every few months, money would find its way to Clara in Dawson Creek. And in my saddlebags, I carried a blue ribbon she had worn in her hair that first day in the store, stolen from her clothesline during one of my secret vigils, my one tangible connection to the woman who never knew she owned my soul. By 1895, I was 41, but looked a decade older, weather-beaten and scarred, with eyes that made even hardened men uncomfortable. My name on a wanted poster meant certain death, and sheriffs across 3 territories used me as a threat to keep minor criminals in line. Straighten up, or we'll send Rourke after you. I had money by then, more than I could spend, blood money saved over 2 decades of hunting. I bought a small cabin high in the Cimarron Mountains of New Mexico, a place to rest between contracts. Sometimes I'd stay there for weeks, speaking to no one, drinking until the faces of the dead receded somewhat into the shadows. It was during one such period of isolation that I received a letter forwarded through a contact in Santa Fe, the only person who knew my whereabouts. The letter was from Thomas Elliott, Clara's son, now 21 and a banker's apprentice in St. Louis. Mr. Rourke, he wrote, "You don't know me, but I believe you knew my parents in Dawson Creek many years ago. My mother, Clara Elliott, has often spoken of the mysterious benefactor who has helped our family through difficult times. Recently, she has fallen on hard times herself. A fire destroyed much of our hometown last spring, including our home and most of our possessions. Mother now lives with me in St. Louis, but her health is poor, and medical expenses are mounting. I write not to ask for further charity, but because she expressed a wish to thank you personally, if you are indeed the anonymous friend who has watched over our family these many years. If you should find yourself near St. Louis, she would be grateful for the chance to express her gratitude." The letter left me shaking. Clara knew. Somehow she had guessed the money came from me, though she couldn't possibly know why or what I had done to earn it. And she was ill, possibly dying. I left for St. Louis the next morning. The city had grown since I'd last seen it, sprawling and smoke-filled, teeming with life and purpose. Thomas Elliott's address was in a respectable neighborhood of narrow brick houses with small, neat gardens. I stood across the street for an hour, watching the house, gathering courage. She opened the door herself when I knocked, and the years fell away like autumn leaves in a strong wind. Clara was 51, her wheat gold hair now streaked with silver, lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth speaking of both laughter and sorrow. She had grown thinner, more fragile, but her eyes, those storm cloud eyes, were unchanged. "Micah Rourke," she said, no surprise in her voice. "I wondered if you'd come." "How did you know it was me?" I asked as she led me into a small sitting room. "The money, I mean." She smiled, settling carefully into a chair, a slight wheeze in her breathing. "At first I didn't, but over the years the timing was too perfect. Help would arrive precisely when needed, as if someone was watching over us. Then, after Eli died," her voice softened. "The bank said the insurance policy had been opened in Kansas City, on a date I remembered you had left town. It seemed too much of a coincidence." I sat across from her, feeling oversized and coarse in her delicate parlor, aware of the guns still strapped beneath my coat from habit. "You've done well for yourself, then?" she asked. "To be able to help us so generously?" I nodded, the lie easier than the truth. "Well enough. What took you west, Micah?" You disappeared so suddenly. The question I had dreaded. "There was nothing left for me in Dawson Creek," I said carefully, "and I'd heard there were opportunities out west." "So you became—" "What exactly?" Her gaze was direct, searching. "A hunter," I said, the word heavy between us. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She had always been perceptive. "A bounty hunter." It wasn't a question. I looked away, unable to bear whatever judgment might come. But Clara surprised me. "You were always watching from the edges, weren't you? Even as a boy, seeing things others missed." Her voice held no condemnation, only a soft wonder. "And then you watched over us, all these years." "I wanted to make sure you were safe," I said, the closest I could come to the truth. She reached across and took my hand. Hers was cool and paper-thin, the veins prominent beneath translucent skin. "Thank you, Micah, for everything. I wish I had known sooner that I could have thanked Eli's quiet guardian while he was alive." The mention of Eli pierced me with fresh guilt. Here was his widow, grateful to the man who had once contemplated his murder, who had loved his wife from the shadows for decades. "How long will you stay in St. Louis?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I have business that might take me south again soon." A lie, The only business awaiting me was a contract on a man named Watson, who had killed 3 women in Texas. "Then you must join us for dinner while you're here. Thomas would like to meet you. He's engaged to be married in the fall. A lovely girl from a good family, and—" She hesitated, color touching her pale cheeks. "There's someone else I'd like you to meet. A friend, Jonas Rayburn. He's been very kind to me since I came to St. Louis." Something cold settled in my stomach. A friend. Clara's smile held a girlish quality I hadn't seen since we were young. More than a friend, perhaps. Jonas is a widower himself, a businessman from California. We met at church. He's been— She looked down at our joined hands. "He's brought light back into my life, Micah. I didn't think that would be possible again after Eli." I forced my face to remain neutral, though inside something was shattering. "I'm happy for you, Clara. Truly." We spoke for another hour of Dawson Creek and old memories, of her son's promising future, of her illness, consumption, slowly but steadily worsening, and of her hopes despite it. Not once did I tell her the full truth, that every dollar I had sent had been earned through death, that my devotion to her had been my religion and justification for decades of violence. When I left, promising to return for dinner the following evening, she embraced me. "I always wondered what happened to that quiet farm boy," she whispered. "I'm glad to see he found his way." If she only knew the path I had taken, the man I had become. I checked into a hotel and immediately sent a telegram to my contact in Santa Fe, requesting everything he could find on Jonas Rayburn of California, recently arrived in St. Louis. Then I went to the nearest saloon and drank until my hands stopped shaking. The reply came the next morning. Jonas Rayburn was not from California. The real Jonas Rayburn, a successful mine owner, had died 2 years earlier near Sacramento. Someone was using his name, his reputation, his wealth. Further telegrams throughout the day revealed more. A man matching the description I provided had been seen in Denver, Chicago, and now St. Louis, always ingratiating himself with wealthy widows, always disappearing with their money or valuables. Sometimes the women died naturally afterward. Sometimes they simply vanished. By evening, cold rage had replaced the shock. Clara, my Clara, had fallen prey to a predator while I had been hunting lesser men across the territories. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had killed so many in her name, had failed to protect her when it mattered most. I cleaned my Remington with mechanical precision, checked my knife, and considered my approach. The direct method, putting a bullet through the impostor's head, would be simplest. But it would devastate Clara, who believed herself in love, and it would reveal me as a killer before her eyes. No, this would require patience, the hunter's approach. I arrived for dinner as promised, meeting Thomas, a serious young man with his father's height and his mother's eyes, and his fiancée, a pretty, dark-haired girl named Margaret, and Jonas Rayburn. He was handsome in the way of confidence men, with silver-streaked dark hair, an easy smile, and eyes that calculated even as they charmed. About 50, well-dressed, with manicured hands that had never known honest labor, he greeted me warmly, one arm possessively around Clara's waist. "Micah is an old friend from Dawson Creek," Clara explained. "He's been our anonymous benefactor all these years." "Then I owe you my gratitude, sir," Rayburn said, extending his hand. "You've helped care for this remarkable woman when I could not." I shook his hand, noting the slight callus on his trigger finger that his genteelness couldn't hide. "It was nothing," I said, smiling with everything but my eyes. "Clara has always inspired devotion." Throughout dinner, I watched him, the way he refilled Clara's wine glass repeatedly, how his stories changed slightly with each telling, the calculating glances at the few nice pieces of furniture or jewelry visible. Most of all, I watched how he touched Clara, not with the reverence of a man in love, but with the satisfaction of a predator who has cornered easy prey. Clara, weakened by illness and loneliness, saw none of it. She glowed in his attention, laughed at his stories, leaned into his touch. It took every ounce of control I possessed not to draw my gun at the table. "Mr. Rourke is in the hunting business," Thomas explained to Rayburn at one point. "Quite successfully, from what I understand." "Is that so?" Rayburn's interest sharpened. "Game hunting?" "Of a sort," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I track things that most would prefer to avoid." A flash of unease crossed his face before the mask of charm returned. "Fascinating. Perhaps we might discuss your adventures sometime. I've done some hunting myself in my younger days." "I'd bet you have," I said, letting a hint of knowledge show in my expression. After dinner, while Clara rested and Thomas showed his fiancée the garden, Rayburn and I shared a cigar on the small porch. "You care for Mrs. Elliot a great deal," he observed, studying me. "Since we were children," I answered honestly. "Yet you never pursued her yourself." "It wasn't a question. Some men recognize when a woman deserves better than they can offer." I tapped ash from my cigar. "And what about you, Mr. Rayburn? What brings a successful California businessman to St. Louis?" His smile tightened. "Opportunity. New beginnings." "Interesting. I heard the real Jonas Rayburn died near Sacramento 2 years ago." The change was immediate. His posture stiffened, eyes hardening into something feral. "You're mistaken." "I don't make mistakes about the men I hunt, Mr. Rayburn. Or should I use your real name?" "I'm not particular." His hand moved toward his jacket, but I was faster. My knife suddenly pressed against his ribs, hidden from street view by our bodies. "Don't," I said quietly. "Not here. Not with her inside." "What do you want?" he hissed, all pretense gone. "You're going to disappear. Tonight. Leave Street Louis and never contact Clara Elliott again." He laughed softly, an ugly sound. "Or what? You'll kill me? And break her heart? She loves me, you know, believes every word, even gave me access to her son's accounts last week." The knife pressed deeper, drawing a bead of blood. "I've killed men for less." "But not where she would know it was you," he countered, reading me too well. "Not where she would see the monster behind the benefactor. You need her gratitude, her good opinion. You need her to go on believing in the shadow you've cast, not the man who casts it." Each word struck true. I had spent decades protecting an image of myself in Clara's mind, the quiet farm boy grown into a successful man who remembered old kindnesses. To kill Rayburn now, before her eyes, would shatter that forever. "1 week," I said finally, withdrawing the knife. "Get your affairs in order. Say whatever goodbyes you must. Then vanish, or I will find you. And I will kill you slowly, over days, in ways that will make you pray for death long before it comes." Fear flickered in his eyes. He recognized truth when he heard it. But then the calculating look returned. "She doesn't have long, you know. The consumption is worse than she admits. The doctor gives her months, not years. Whatever she has will be mine before then." It took everything in me not to slit his throat where he stood. 1 week, I repeated, then turned and walked away before I changed my mind. I spent the next 7 days watching the Elliott house, following Rayburn when he left Clara's side. He was indeed planning something. I observed him meeting with a rough-looking man near the riverfront, exchanging money. Later, I broke into his rented rooms and found laudanum and arsenic hidden in a false-bottom trunk, along with papers for multiple identities and jewelry I recognized as Clara's. He intended to hasten her death, take what he could, and disappear before Thomas realized what had happened. And he was moving faster than expected. I overheard him at the bank, attempting to withdraw a significant sum from an account Clara had added his name to. On the 6th night, I made my decision. Rayburn had accelerated his timetable, telling Clara they would travel to California for her health once the money was secured. She would never survive the journey, likely wouldn't survive the first night away from her son's watchful eye. I waited in the alley behind his lodgings, in the shadows I had inhabited all my life. When he returned near midnight, I stepped out silently behind him. "Your week isn't up," he said without turning, having sensed my presence. "You're not keeping our agreement," I answered. "The bank withdrawal, the poison, the man you hired at the docks." Now he turned, his hand moving to the small pistol I knew he carried. "You've been busy." "I'm thorough when protecting what's mine." His smile was knowing and cruel. "She was never yours, Rourke. Not when you were young, not during her marriage, not now." "Step into the alley," I said, my Remington already drawn. "I'd rather not make a scene in the street." To my surprise, he complied, moving deeper into the darkness. "You won't shoot me," he said confidently. "She'll know it was you." I told her I feared for my life, that a man was threatening me, a man who claimed to be an old friend of hers. She didn't believe me at first, but she will when I turn up dead. Cold fury washed through me. He had anticipated this, had poisoned her against me even as he planned to poison her body. "She's dying anyway," he continued, watching my face. "Why not let her die happy, believing in love? You take me away from her now, and her last months will be in misery and betrayal." For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he right? Would killing him only bring Clara more pain in her final days? Then I remembered the poison in his trunk, the plans already in motion. "She deserves the truth," I said, "even if it hurts." "Then tell her," he challenged. "Tell her everything. How you've loved her from afar all these years. How you've killed men by the dozen and sent her their blood money. How you've stalked her like a shadow, stealing pieces of her life to fuel your obsession." His smile widened. "Tell her what you really are." My finger tightened on the trigger. "Draw your gun," I said, needing to make this at least appear as self-defense. "Give me the excuse." Instead, he laughed. "You're pathetic, Rourke. A killer too cowardly to face the one person whose opinion matters. I may be a thief and a liar, but at least I had the courage to stand before her in the light." The pistol appeared in his hand, but I was faster. My first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him against the brick wall. The second caught him in the leg as he tried to aim. The third struck his chest as he slid down the wall, eyes wide with disbelief. I knelt beside him as his blood pooled on the cobblestones, the metallic scent mixing with the alley's filth. "She'll never forgive you for this," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "She doesn't need to know," I said, watching the light fade from his eyes. "She already does," he whispered, a final smile twisting his face. "I told her. Everything I suspected about you. Everything. She didn't believe me, but she will now." The last breath rattled from him, and Jonas Rayburn, or whatever his real name had been, was gone. I searched his body, taking anything that might link him to Clara. Letters, the small portrait of her he carried, the pocket watch she had given him that had once belonged to Eli. These I would destroy, erasing his connection to her. Let him be another nameless drifter killed in a robbery gone wrong. I left his body there, knowing it would be found by morning, another statistic in the city's growing violence. Part of me hoped Clara would never know what happened to him, that he would simply vanish from her life as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving her to mourn what might have been rather than face another betrayal. But Rayburn's final words haunted me as I made my way back to my hotel. "She already knows." Had he truly poisoned her mind against me? Would she connect his disappearance to my presence? The answer came the next day. I had planned to visit Clara, to offer comfort for Rayburn's mysterious disappearance, to be the friend she needed in her time of grief. Instead, a boy delivered a note to my hotel. "Micah," it read in Clara's delicate hand, "Jonas is dead. The police say he was murdered. Before he died, he told me he feared for his life because of you. I didn't want to believe it. Please, if our friendship ever meant anything to you, come to the house this evening and tell me it isn't true. Clara ... I stared at the note for an hour, weighing my options. I could leave Saint Louis, disappear back into the territories, let her believe what she would. I could go to her and deny everything, add more lies to the mountain I had built between us. Or I could finally tell her the truth, after all these years. In the end, the decision was made for me. As dusk fell, a knock came at my door. Thomas Elliot stood there, his father's revolver gripped tightly in his hand. "She's asking for you," he said, his voice tight with anger. "My mother is asking for you with what might be her last breaths." "What do you mean?" Fear clutched at my heart. "The shock of Jonas's death." His voice broke. "The doctor says the consumption has taken a sudden turn. She may not last the night." I grabbed my coat and followed him without a word, my mind racing. Had the shock truly accelerated her illness? Or had Rayburn already begun poisoning her before I killed him? The Elliott house was dark when we arrived, save for a single lamp burning in Clara's bedroom window. Thomas led me upstairs, his grip on the revolver never loosening. "She made me promise not to call the police until she spoke with you," he said at her door. "But if you've hurt her in any way, if you had anything to do with Jonas's death—" "I understand," I said quietly. Clara lay propped up in bed, her face ashen, a handkerchief spotted with blood clutched in one thin hand. She looked so small, so fragile, the illness having consumed much of what remained of her strength. Yet her eyes were clear when they met mine. "Leave us, Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mother, please, I need to speak with Micah alone." Reluctantly, Thomas stepped outside, closing the door but remaining just beyond it, the revolver still in his hand. I approached her bed slowly, afraid of what I might see in her eyes. Accusation, fear, hatred. Instead, I found only sadness and a terrible understanding. "Did you kill him, Micah?" she asked directly, no preamble. I had lived by lies for so long, but in that moment, facing Clara's mortality, I couldn't bring myself to offer another. "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. "Why?" "He wasn't who he claimed to be, Clara. He was using you, planning to take everything you had and leave you, or worse." I sat carefully on the edge of her bed. "I found poison among his things, papers for false identities. He'd done this before, to other women. And you appointed yourself my protector. It wasn't a question. As you have all these years, I couldn't let him hurt you." She studied me, her gaze penetrating despite her weakness. "Jonas told me things before he died. About you, about the kind of man you've become, about how you've watched me. All these years." She coughed, the sound wet and painful. "Is it true? The killing? The obsession?" Again, the truth was the only option left to me. "Yes." "How many, Micah? How many have died by your hand?" 47, I said, the number engraved in my soul. 48 now, with Rayburn. She flinched. "And all this time, I thought you were a good man who had found success, who remembered a kindness from childhood and repaid it generously." Her voice grew stronger with anger. "Instead, you've been living in shadow, killing in my name, sending me blood money." "Not all of them were for you," I interrupted, then stopped, the lie catching in my throat. "Number. That's not true. They were all for you, in one way or another, even when I told myself otherwise. Did you ever think to simply tell me how you felt? When we were young, the question held decades of might-have-beens. You deserved better than a poor farm boy with nothing to his name. That wasn't your decision to make." Her eyes flashed with the spirit I remembered. "You chose for both of us, Micah. You chose this path of death and shadows, and you dragged my name through it without my knowledge or consent." Each word struck like a physical blow. "I wanted to protect you. I said weakly. No. She shook her head, another cough racking her thin frame. You wanted to possess me, to control the world around me. That isn't love, Micah. It's obsession. It's sickness. I never asked for anything in return, I protested. Except my ignorance, she countered. My blindness to what you were doing in my name. She looked away, toward the window where night had fully fallen. I loved Eli, you know. Truly, deeply loved him. We had a good life together. Not perfect, not wealthy, but honest and true. And I was beginning to feel something real for Jonas, despite what you say he was. He would have killed you, Clara. Perhaps. She turned back to me. Or perhaps I would have seen through him eventually. You never gave me the chance to find out, just as you never gave me the chance to know you, the real you, not this ghost you've become. I had no answer for that. She was right. I want you to leave, Saint. Louis, she said after a long silence. Leave and never return. Thomas doesn't need to know what you've done. It would only bring him pain. As far as the world will know, Jonas was killed by a random thief and you returned to your business in the West. Clara? No. Her voice was final. You've taken enough from me, Micah Rourke. You won't take my son's innocence or my final peace. I stood, understanding that this was goodbye. I loved you, I said simply. In my broken way, I loved you. She looked at me, one last time, her eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions, pity, anger, regret, and something like mourning for the boy I had once been. Then God help us both, she whispered. I left without looking back, passing Thomas in the hallway with a nod. Take care of her, I said, and then I was gone, back into the night where I belonged. I returned west the next morning, back to my cabin in the mountains, back to solitude and whiskey and the weight of what I had done. I took no more contracts, killed no more men. The hunger for it had died in Clara's bedroom, replaced by a hollow understanding of what I had become. Word reached me 3 months later that Clara Elliott had passed peacefully in her sleep. The letter came from Thomas, a courtesy to his mother's old friend, nothing more. He didn't know I had opened an account in his name with enough money to secure his future and that of his bride. One final gift from the shadow that had haunted his family. In the letter, he mentioned something that has haunted me ever since. In her final moments, he wrote, Mother called out for Jonas. Even knowing what he was, what he intended, she sought comfort in his memory rather than in truth. Perhaps there is mercy in that. Jonas. Not Eli, her husband of 20 years. Not me, her lifelong shadow. But Jonas Rayburn, the last man I killed in her name. I've thought often about that in the years since. About how Clara, even knowing the truth of Rayburn's intentions, found more comfort in her memory of him than in the reality of what I had been to her. How, in her final breaths, she whispered the name of a man who had at least stood before her in the light, rather than lurked in the shadows as I had done. Perhaps that is justice. The final twist of the knife in a heart grown too callous to feel ordinary pain. I am dying now, as winter approaches these mountains. The cough that started last spring has worsened, blood appearing with increasing frequency. The doctor in Santa Fe gave me months, not years. I've made my peace with that. There is a certain symmetry to dying of the same illness that took Clara, as if her final breath has finally caught up with me. I write this not seeking forgiveness. There is none for a man who has done what I have done. I write it as confession, as warning. 48 lives ended by my hand. 48 souls sent to judgment, all in the name of a love that was nothing but possession dressed in devotion's clothes. If you're reading this, stranger, know that you found the remains of Micah Rourke, born 1854, died 1899. Bounty hunter, killer, ghost. Take what valuables remain here, the money in the strongbox beneath the floorboards, the guns, whatever else might be of use. Use it better than I did. And remember this. If love demands blood, it ain't love. It's rot. And I let it hollow me out until there was nothing left but dust and iron and the memory of a girl in a blue dress standing in sunlight I was never worthy to share. Micah Rourke, October 17, 1899.